The first overwhelming reaction towards the news of the resurrection of Jesus was fear. The women had seen Jesus brutally killed and had seen his mangled body placed in a tomb, and they had seen the boulder rolled in front of the entryway of it. That morning, returning to the tomb, they find it open. They step inside and are frightened at the sight of a young man in a white robe sitting there. "Do not be alarmed," he says. "You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." And the terrified women ran out of there as fast as they could, and they told no one what had happened. Some of the oldest versions of Mark's gospel apparently end right there. And they told no one what had happened, for they were afraid. Yet it seems that this ending was so weird and so bleak that there are a couple of later additional endings tacked on to the end of Mark's gospel. And they really do read like tacked on endings. Not to mention that in this original ending, as we heard, the risen Jesus does not even make an appearance. So what is all of the terror and amazement and fearful silence about? I think it has something to do with that young man in the white robe in the tomb. Now you may have thought that young man was supposed to be an angel. And of course in Matthew's gospel, an angel does indeed show up, and he rolls the heavy stone away from the tomb entrance. And in Luke's gospel, two men in dazzling clothes appear to the women. That's clearly supernatural. But here in Mark's gospel, I don't think this young man is an angel at all. I think the gospel writer is getting at something else. So follow along. If you were here for Palm Sunday, last Sunday, and if you were paying attention to the Passion Gospel according to Mark, you probably discovered a bizarre detail in that text. That detail is found just after Jesus was betrayed by Judas in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus is arrested by a mob, and all of the disciples desert him and flee. And then we read, "A certain young man was following Jesus, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. The mob caught hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked." From that point on, the passion of Jesus begins after that strange detail. I believe the young man in the garden and the young man in white in the empty tomb are one and the same. The young man represents a candidate for baptism. And this baptismal candidate must make an ultimate choice, a concrete, risky, and dangerous choice to follow Jesus even to suffering and death, or not. In the Garden of Gethsemane, alongside the arrested Jesus, this young person is wearing a linen cloth. And in the Greek, it's the word for shroud. This young candidate is watching his own funeral take place. So will he suffer and die along with Jesus? It's time to decide. Jesus is being taken away. The disciples flee into the darkness. The mob catches sight of the young man and they close in on him, is stripped of his burial shroud. And even now, his nakedness demands a course of action. Is he going to run into the darkness and hide in order to preserve his life? Or will he step into the deep waters of baptism and be born again, naked, and embrace a life that may well bring on his death? Will he run from himself at his own funeral? He runs. In fear, he runs. This young man represents the countless men and women who had to make ultimate choices as they faced the waters of baptism. Facing the possibility of suffering and death for the sake of the gospel, something you and I hardly imagine. Some of them indeed ran. And some came back. They chose nakedness and vulnerability for the sake of the gospel, just as Jesus did. They entered those baptismal waters to suffer and die and rise with him. And upon rising from those waters, they were clothed in garments of white. Who then is the one in the white robe who greets the women at the tomb? I believe it is the baptized church of Easter telling the terrified church of Good Friday to spread the message. He is not here. He has been raised. Go, get out of here. Tell everyone this good news. It is only the baptized church of Easter, persecuted by the powers of the world, that can announce that Christ is risen and that Christ is Lord. It is only the baptized church of Easter that has chosen to live and die with Jesus no matter what. It is only the baptized church of Easter that sees hope where others only see despair. And the baptized church of Easter positively terrifies and amazes the church of Good Friday. The church of Good Friday runs and keeps quiet. The church of Good Friday is just being practical, realistic even. The church of Good Friday is really good at blending in with the demands of the world. It thinks that's an asset. The church of Good Friday sticks with what it knows. The church of Good Friday is imprisoned by its limits. The church of Good Friday looks out for itself. The church of Good Friday thinks that retaliation and violence is a Christ-like solution, a Christ-sanctioned solution, just as Peter the Apostle did when Jesus was arrested by the mob. Church of Good Friday is tortured by the memory of abandoning Jesus and of denying ever knowing him, and it cannot imagine a way forward. The Church of Good Friday thought it had it all figured out about Jesus until Good Friday happened. The only thing the Church of Good Friday can think of doing is embalming the dead body of Jesus, because the Church of Good Friday fears its own death more than anything. And from the vantage point of Good Friday, the death-defying church of Easter looks as bizarre and astonishing and unbelievable as Christ crucified and risen. It is the church of Easter that trusts that the risen Jesus is dwelling with us and walking with us even now in this moment, present to us alive with our heartbeats and with our very breath in us. It is the church of Easter that does not count the cost for our love of the gospel, because the greatest cost has already been paid. church of Easter that stands despite the powers of this world, despite the system of sin that wants to give us an ultimate identity. It is the church of Easter that goes on with the risen Lord, despite the reign of fear and death that wants to eat it alive. On which side of the empty tomb are you? On which side of the empty tomb are we? Are we alive as the church of Easter? Or are we still dwelling in the shadows of the church of Good Friday? Are we more afraid of death or the resurrection?